Hi, welcome to this short screencast where I'm going to talk you through the Measurement and Monitoring of Safety Framework, which is a publication released by the Health Foundation in 2013. Charles Vincent and colleagues produced this document and actually produced the framework we're going to look at in a couple of moments, but I just thought I'd give you a little bit of background as to why this work was done and how it was done. So, I'm sure you're all aware of the Francis Report and how the Francis Report highlighted failings in care and also made us question how safe care was across a variety of settings. So, following the publication of the Francis Report, the government actually asked Charles Vincent and colleagues to think about answering that question: how safe is care in the NHS? And this led to a bit of work being funded by the Health Foundation to try and be able to answer this question, really. So Charles and colleagues did a lot of research. They drew together academic evidence from a range of settings, both within healthcare and without. They looked at some high-risk industries, so petrochemical, the nuclear industry, the rail industry, and tried to synthesise information from those settings about how we could understand how safe our operations are. They also spent a lot of time doing research within the healthcare setting, both in clinical settings and in a more research academic setting, to try and answer this question. And what they found is it was very difficult to answer the question, how safe is your care, how safe care is, quickly and easily. So if I ask you that question, ask you to think about a placement area that you've worked in possibly, how safe is the care in that setting? So if you just mull over that question, could you put a value on it? On a scale of 1 to 5, can you put a figure on how safe the care is? So with 1, care not being very safe at all, being very poor. 5, care being extremely safe, you'd very happily be looked after in that setting. And just mull over a figure. Okay, generally that kind of figure comes to you in an automatic way, but it might be worth exploring what judgments you've made to draw that conclusion or to come up with that figure. Just to be reassuring, this is just an exercise I'm getting you to do to sort of illustrate how difficult it is to categorise how safe care is really. Most people won't say care is level 5 safe. Most people won't say care is level 1 safe. They'll come up with around a 3 to 4, unless you've seen something particularly outstanding or surprising. So what I want us to just consider is the kind of things that were in your head when you were making that judgment. And often what people jump to is thinking about incidents that have happened in the past, as being used as a judgment for how safe care is in that setting. And that's great, but it's only part of the picture. Within the framework that Charles and colleagues offered and developed to try and help us broaden our horizon and broaden the things that we think about when we're trying to understand how safe care is, I'm now going to talk you through their framework and look at some other dimensions that are also really important in trying to answer that question. So, this is a diagrammatic representation of the Measurement and Monitoring of Safety Framework, and you can see in the centre is the safety measuring and monitoring, and around the outside are 5 different bubbles relating to different things that the research that Charles and colleagues did found were important in determining how safe care is. So I just asked you a question about how you would rate the care in settings where you've worked, and asked you to come up with a figure between 1 to 5. And one of the things I pointed out you might have drew upon to come up with that value was around past harm and things that have gone on in the past. And certainly through the research that was done around this, that was where most people were making their judgment based upon information in that domain. So here we're looking at the top bubble, past harm, what was care like in the past, and will that give us an indication of how safe care is? So we're going to pick through the rest of the different bubbles and have a little conversation about how thinking more broadly might be useful. So, past harm. Has patient care been safe in the past? So there are loads of different things we can do to look at that and to try and understand this. We might choose to look at incidents that have been reported, for example, and determine if there's any themes, or look at the frequency of harm that's occurring. But I'm sure you'll already be aware from the other sessions that you've had in university that reporting of error and reporting of incidents is generally very low. So there was a piece of research done in around 2007 by Sari and colleagues, and they actually demonstrated that when you look back retrospectively through patients' notes, you will pick out probably 90–95% more errors and incidents than is reported in the reporting system. So by that I mean Datex, etc. So that really demonstrates that really just looking at incident reports only scratches the surface of what really is going on in terms of past harm. There are other things we can look at. We can look at mortality statistics, so to tell us what is killing patients. We can look at things like global track and trigger reporting tools that are reporting things that have gone wrong as well. So there are different ways we can look at past harm. The thing to point out here really that is, if we only look backwards of what things have gone wrong in the past, we take our mind off what's going forward. So Charles Vincent and colleagues in this report talk about it would be like driving your car only looking in your rear view mirror. It's an important picture looking at past harm, but it certainly isn't all of the picture. So whilst looking at past harm is good, we want to encourage you to think about looking in other areas as well, and hence we're going to move forward now and look at some other domains. So the next bubble around the diagram is reliability, and this bubble asks us to ask the question, how reliable is the care that we deliver? And this really is about audit and checking that our processes are reliable and people are doing what we're meant to be doing. So I think there's two parts to this really. There's a part where do the processes and systems that we have in place actually work? So if I ask you as a member of my team to wash your hands between every patient, and I accept and you accept that you know that that's what should be happening, does that actually happen? Or is there something that gets in the way and prevents you from doing that? If I ask you to monitor blood sugars on all patients every 2 hours, that is the process, that is our system. But is that always feasible and achievable? So reliability is really important in checking that we're meeting the standards that we set ourselves. It's also really important to be checking that do the standards do what they're supposed to be doing, or actually to be successful and deliver effective care, do we sometimes need to operate outside of the processes that we've established and set up to help us provide care? So two parts. One, are the standards achievable? And two, are they being adhered to? And if not, why not? And there may be some work to do around that if there's a separation between the two aspects really. So just as some pointers, some suggestions there from the report were things that you could look at were percentages of all inpatients screened for MRSA. So that will be something you'll be familiar with, I'm sure. It's a standard, what's the compliance with that standard like? There's also a standard for pressure care, pressure area care, and there's a care bundle for that. Is that care bundle adhered to? And checking the reliability of care in that way. So it will depend on the settings you work in terms of what specific processes you need to check for their reliability. Yeah, so let's move on and think about the next bubble in this framework. Okay, so the third bubble or domain is called sensitivity to operations. It's a little bit wordy, this one, and I think this one can be probably the most challenging to get your head around. So, basically this domain is asking the question, let's say that again. basically this domain is asking, is care safe today? So I think this is giving a voice really to those little day-to-day activities that you do routinely when you're looking after patients, and trying to get you to explore them a bit further. So, Charles Vincent relates this to riding a bike. If you think about riding a bike, you will vary how you do that according to the conditions on the road, the conditions of the weather, the traffic, and you'll make subtle, minute adjustments. I don't know if many of you ride a bike, but if you can picture, you're constantly moving the handlebars, aren't you, and your feet to enable you to stay on that bike and progress. So, apply that then to being in a practice setting. What little tweaks do you make along your day, and what conversations do you have constantly to try and ensure safety? It might be things like recognising that you're becoming low on equipment and reporting that to different members of the team to ensure that the next shift has everything they need to be able to function successfully. It might be things like having a new admission and suddenly recognising you've got 2 patients with the same name. So this is being sensitive in the moment to subtle little changes you need to make to keep people safe. And the way to monitor and prepare for that is by being open and having conversations about this. So some of the ways Charles and colleagues suggest sensitivity to operations can be enhanced is through doing things like having safety huddles. So coming together, all staff coming together to share information. It might be things like looking at staffing levels to make sure you've got the right skill mix available to be able to care for patients. It might be things like interviewing patients to identify threats to patient safety that they can see that you can't. And a really interesting piece of work I became aware of around that was to do with some interviews done with patients who attend chest clinic. And they said the time they felt least safe was getting from their car into the chest clinic because the car parking was so bad at the hospital. They were often having to walk in the cold, which really irritated and aggravated their condition, to the clinic up a hill, and felt really unsafe and vulnerable because of this. So the value of triangulating information from different sources can't be emphasised enough really, and that was just sort of one illustration. Okay, let's move on to the next domain or bubble. Okay, so this domain is anticipation and preparedness. This is where we're thinking about being proactive really and trying to do things in an anticipating way. So, things we might look at here is making sure that all the mandatory training people need to undertake is up to date, making sure that people have set training in patient safety so that they're able to recognise and respond. Other things might include trying to understand and improve the safety culture or the organisational culture. So you will all know that because you go and practice placements in lots of different areas, that some wards or areas you work in will feel different in terms of the culture to others. So there's a good body of work now that illustrates that improving the culture and how people work together really impacts upon patient safety. And doing some work around this and helping the culture of the organisation to improve can be really beneficial in terms of anticipating and preparing for making care safer in the future. It may relate this domain to specific actions you need to take. So one area I've done some work with was in primary care, and they spent a lot of time preparing their settings in terms of having the right equipment available so that they minimised interruptions and delays between cases because they only had 8 minutes to see patients. So something like that is a good example of how you might anticipate and plan ahead prior to taking somebody, bringing a client or a patient into a clinical setting. I suppose another example would be the preparation you do when you pre-brief for theatre cases. Okay, so the final domain is integration and learning. So sometimes when things don't go to plan and we have incidents or patient care is compromised, we take steps to overcome this and try and prevent it from happening in the future. And that's really important, isn't it, in terms of learning as an organisation. However, sometimes we know, well, quite often we know that this learning actually doesn't transform practice. It's either captured at a very local level, so one area might know about this learning and might have put steps in place, but it might not be shared more broadly. So part of this domain is thinking about how we share learning that we get really across our local areas, but also more widely, either through directorates or through trusts, and then across the NHS as a whole. So it talks in the little box at the side about automated information management systems, and NHS Improvement are actually revising some of the reporting systems to try and help with this. I don't know whether it's going to be delayed by our current situation, but that is the plan, that we're going to be trying to improve our reporting and learning services so that we can gain more learning and better understanding rather than just reporting things and nothing changing. Okay, so we've whistle-stopped through a framework. The reference for this framework was on the bottom of one of the slides at the beginning. So if you want to access that and find out a little bit more, that is there for you to peruse. There's loads of information on the Health Foundation website around this framework, and I think really the parting message is to think beyond past harm. Think about other facets of safety when you're trying to understand if care has been safe or if care is safe. I think the other thing to take away from this is the need for an inquiring and an inquisitive mindset. We don't want to just reassure ourselves that care is safe. We want to be constantly questioning and probing to test it is safe, and using these bubbles and these questions can help with that. Okay, so I'm going to leave this screencast now. If anyone's got any specific questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. So that's Debbie Clark, and my email address is deborah.clark@shoe.ac.uk. Thank you.